welcome to Davenant Discussions. Today, I am your host, Steven Wedgeworth, and I am joined by Wyatt Graham, the Executive Director of the Davenant Institute. And we're excited to have Wyatt on the show to tell us all about the most recent conference. So, Wyatt, welcome to the show.
I feel very welcomed in this place that I've been to before.
And so you just got finished with a new sort of Davenant conference. In years past, Davenant did occasional conferences, but the annual gathering was an intentionally smaller gathering that we would call the convivium. We reached kind of the limits of what convivium could do a few years ago, and so decided to rethink it. And I believe it's fair to say this year was the first year of something new, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've done some events. I believe, was it 2014? There was an event called The Future of Protestantism in California. It was in California that had Fred Sanders, Carl Trueman, Peter Escalante, and
Peter Leithart.
And so, this was a similar type of an event where you had some public talks that were accessible to people, and yet brought some of the Davenant world into it through, we shared papers with one another. We shared one full meal together and a breakfast together, and had lots of these kind of conversational spaces to talk through things. And
now,
tell
us the name and the main speakers.
Yeah, what is Christian Freedom? Just the name is what is Christian Freedom is the conference. And the main speakers are Kevin DeYoung, who is a pastor in the PCA, kind of associated with the Young Restless Reform movement, but kind of, let's say, stayed theologically robust through that. And then Carl Trueman, who is, I guess, professor at Grove City, but fairly well known in reformational circles for his historical work on the Reformation, and most recently on cultural issues of import like expressive individualism and so on. So they were the main speakers. We had 3 main talks and a panel discussion with them. And then the papers were like various groups of people that are connected in our world, Miles Smith from Hillsdale and so on.
All right. So Christian freedom, my own background, growing up kind of somewhat fundamentalist Baptist and becoming Reformed, Christian freedom means you can drink beer. But it means other things historically. You can think about Martin Luther applying that to justification. But more recently, people probably are applying that to civil liberties and politics. So what did you guys mean by that at the conference? What was Christian freedom really all about? And maybe hit some of the big ideas that you took away.
Well, one of the cool things of the Davenant world is that you can mix all the genres of things together. In the academic world, it's called interdisciplinary discourse. But really, that means you talk to people who have different skills, Bible guy, philosophy guy, culture guy. So we kind of did a threefold talk where Carl, his first talk was what I got wrong or what I missed when I wrote on expressive individualism and the notions of the freedom of the individual from his recent Crossway work. I'm actually forgetting the rise and triumph of the modern self. It was kind of a talk like what I missed. And one of the things that he missed was, which is interesting, probably will get this podcast canceled if I say it out loud, but it'll be fun to say it out loud, was that the transhumanism movement is this ascendant movement, and really underneath that is a subset of transgenderism is a subset of that. And so in the vibe shift away from some of the more uncomfortable forms of trans discourse, yet at the same time you have transhumanism that's exploding. And both of those are attempting to breach the natural limits of the human body.
Okay.
Essentially, one of the conclusions of that talk is essentially we need to, and when I say we, I mean the Davenant Institute and Steven Wedgeworth and Wyatt Graham need to write more stuff on a Protestant theology of the body. Because while we may have these vibe shifts here and there, I don't think the transhumanism discussion's going away anytime soon. I think it's going to accelerate with AI and with min-maxing your health, guys like Brian Johnson and so on who are doing that.
Yeah. And I guess also with the strange variations on pronatalism, you
Yes.
also see kind of almost a eugenics type of emphasis there.
That's 100%. So it was a really interesting talk in that kind of thankfully he didn't, he could have just restated his talks he's done 200 times, but he kind of said, what did I miss? Not like he got
Mhm.
it wrong, but like what would I have added or kind of from his book. That was interesting. Kevin did a lot. I asked him to do something from a pastoral perspective on like what does Christian freedom look like for Christians. I think it's really important in the Davenant world. Yes, it's academic. You're going to do this cultural analysis and theology, but what does that mean in the church? I just think that's a really key question. So I kind of asked him that given his setting. He's an RTS prof, but he's also a pastor, so he's not necessarily, one might say, a pure academic. So he gave a kind of a really helpful practical talk on freedom and the conscience of a Christian. And he talked a little bit about, I'll give you an anecdote on this, but he talked a little bit about the Westminster Confession, its modifications in the U.S. setting to talk about authority and so on with the magistrate. And it was funny, before the talk, I just said to him, yeah, you may know in our circles where you can say what you want. There might be friendly pushback, based on what you say, but it'll be in the context of just like curiosity and so on. And then he said to me, well, I'm talking to the conscience. I don't think it'll be really controversial. And then he had like this 10-minute thing on the modifications of the Westminster Confession of Faith. And I was like, I
Yeah,
bet you I kind of looked over at one or two people who might find that controversial. It's kind of one of those
sure.
funny settings where you're maybe not as used to it, but it went well. I had some helpful things to say on the conscience. When we talked in the panel discussion after, one of the fascinating things that he didn't fully mention was how do you form your conscience positively under authority? So I asked him about that as well, because I imagine you have someone who might come to your church and has to sort of submit themselves to worship according to the BCP, for example, worship according to the 39 articles. I don't really know if the homilies play too much in your particular church, but like that kind of structure, and then also the authority of the the bishop and the priest. But if you're like an Anabaptist, but that's the only evangelical church, how do you have this conscience that yes, you need to do the right thing according to the Word of God, but it also needs to be shaped by these authority structures that God has given us. So I think they'll put that on YouTube. It's kind of an interesting discussion where he kind of had to go back and forth on that. I found it interesting, and
Yeah.
I think we need a more robust conversation about that. However, because
Okay.
if you if conscience is mainly the sort of resisting point of view, how do I think of John Mark Comer at the end of his book Practicing the Way. The conclusion is make your own way of life. That
Mm,
defeats the whole purposes of a way of life. You submit yourself to an uncomfortable way of life that you don't fully understand in trust of authority,
right.
and your conscience has to warm up to that.
Yeah. So it sounds like Truman was doing more of the individual conscience, the
Yes.
mind, and how you think of who you are. And then Kevin is perhaps doing the individual's relationship to church and state. All right. Very good. Now, I
And there's a
did
third one too.
a third one. Okay.
Yeah, Carl in the morning on Saturday did their talk on the freedom of the Christian man from Martin Luther and what that meant in the Reformation. So it was
Very
kind of the
good.
cultural analysis, the pastoral thinking, and then the theological foundation of Christian freedom.
Gotcha. Very good. Now, I did think it was curious. The Davenant Institute, named after an Anglican, we do a lot of work, at least historically, we did a lot of work on sort of political theology. Basically, you had two people who represent, as you say, a modified, revised version of Presbyterianism. As far as I understand, both Carl and Kevin would be very happily at home in the American landscape of separation of church and state, religious liberty, not merely toleration. And even perhaps over the years, they may have been more sympathetic to like Van Drunen and that expression of two kingdoms than say a lot of the people that were the first generation Davenant people.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if those topics came up, did we have any lone voice prophet crying out saying, but maybe Christendom wasn't a mistake? Is there a future for a Christian politics? Did that come up?
It did in indirect ways, especially I think in the Q&A. We had Q&As after the talk, short ones as well. And what was fascinating to me is I think there's been a shift in 20 well, in the mid 2000s there was the Young Restless Reformed that would be very Van Drunian in its understanding of the two spheres of, the two kingdoms, to the point that it could sound like there's no positive position for Christians to influence, politics or whatever you want to say. At least it could sound like that to people. But in the Q&A, there's some that did come up, and I think there's been a bit of a shift where people see, oh, you are in the world, you can positively affect it. Things like natural law are part of the discourse again. The common good is good for all. Maybe we should pursue that as avenues of neighborly love and so on. But it didn't come up as like a direct confrontation. I wonder with both of the main speakers if they would be quite as comfortable with that earlier instantiation of kind of the Van Drunen, point of view. I kind of wonder if things have changed because of the not the sexual revolution, but the modern uh, individual. I don't know what do we call it actually? What's the modern
Yeah.
revolution called? The body revolution, where you're just gonna choose your own adventure in a body. I think there's been
Yeah. Revolution of identity, I guess. Public identity,
yeah,
sexual
in vitro
identity.
fertilization's a part of it, maid's a part of it as well, where you can just kind
Yeah.
of you actually don't want bad laws around May. So there's a real sense in which Christians should be the salt and light of the world in a very impactful way. So I don't think that was a conflict. I doubt I think if you kind of grew up in those circles, you don't really have the language of a more classical Hookerian
That's right.
view of two kingdoms. Although Carl did mention Richard Hooker as kind of a key thinker at one point. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm old now, not as feisty and combative as I would have been years ago. So I'll let these guys do their thing and not get upset. But it did strike me as a little bit interesting that the founding of Davenant Institute, many of us would have been really big on the sort of Richard Hooker and others expression of natural law, and we would claim two kingdoms in a different way. In a way that did open up and defend a kind of public Christian political arrangement. So yeah, I would love for that to come back in the conversation at some point. Put it down the road.
well, it might next year. I don't know if you may know this, but you're one of the three speakers for our next year's conference.
What? I'm a speaker at next year's
Yep.
conference. Wow.
Yeah, it'll be early June or last week of May. I just gotta get the final dates worked out with all of you guys. But
Okay.
people who have
Wow.
agreed are Jordan Cooper, who's
Put that in my phone right here.
you got to
So
put that
I.
in your phone right now. I'm just letting you know. Jordan Cooper, Steven, who's Lutheran, so he would probably have an interesting view on two kingdoms as well. Gavin Ortland, who's well, he's a Baptist,
He says
but
he's a Baptist. I don't know.
yeah,
I think we can claim him as a magisterial Protestant.
yeah, he's secretly baptizing babies in the back and leaning into natural. I mean, I think one of the things is he seems to be trending I don't know if he would say this, but he's trending magisterial from every YouTube video he records.
Yes, no, you know, Wyatt, I love the Baptist. I give you guys a hard time, but we wouldn't be here without you.
There's the sense to give you cover for all sorts of things, and then yourself, who is, from what I understand, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it this way, like a traditional Anglican. I don't know if that's the right word. I don't know what you call yourself, but
Yeah, just say you're an Anglican after the Reformation model, I guess. Yeah,
a reformational Anglican. I think if you're in the
yeah.
UK, maybe evangelical. I don't even know. The terminology is interesting because you don't want to say Anglican in some places where there's a Church of England and so on. But
Yeah. No, there's a group that uses the expression reformational Anglican, so they're out there, and generally I would be sympathetic, common traveler with them. Traditional Anglican is tricky because unfortunately the Anglo Catholics have kind of stolen some of that language. So if I advertise myself as a traditional Anglican, a lot of people would expect something different. So yeah, I would just say Reformation based Anglicanism. That's fine.
that's helpful. And the theme will actually be on kind of why be Protestant. So a little bit of a sequel to I think it was 2014, the one I mentioned earlier on the future of Protestantism. I think, in that talk, as I understand, there's maybe, Peter Lightheart's obviously the end kind of thing, but I think we might want to argue there's a reason still to be Protestant. There's a profound vision of Protestantism that can
Mm.
be robust, and you don't have to deconvert or whatever it's called. In the past month, I've talked to a couple of people, one converting away from Protestantism and another one considering it.
Mm.
And some of the reasons why I think are reasons that are not accurate to what Protestantism is, but to what they perceive it as being. And so I think there's just an important discussion to have. So we'll talk about that together.
Okay. Well,
Um,
very exciting.
I will I will quickly mention we're also doing a national convivium next year as well.
Mm.
It'll be at a different time. We're just going through the details, but it's going to be on America 250 and the future of America with this technological age. And we've asked one or two people to help with that, but that'll come and be announced soon.
Okay, great. Now, this most recent conference, it was in Charlotte, am I correct?
Yes, Charlotte, North Carolina.
And was hosted at an OPC church.
Right.
The name of that church was what?
Resurrection Resurrection Church in Matthews,
Okay.
North Carolina.
Matthews, North Carolina. Great.
Well,
And
it's Charlotte, but it's a suburb.
right. It's right next door. Got it. And do you envision Charlotte to basically be a hub for the next several years?
I think so. Now, one of the questions that we had though was perfect venue. However, it's not next to the airport and hotel. So would it be better maybe just move it down the road to not down the road, but to like Raleigh or something like that, where there's just a bit of a simpler, you fly in, there's hotels if you want to stay there kind of feel.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we went here partly was we did a bit of a retreat beforehand and we thought about doing a but we realized we had to kind of separate them out just for the sake of it's just too much of them all at once.
Mhm.
So this would be more of our big gathering for people that want to drive or fly out to have an entryway into the Davenant world, to kind of get a taste of sharing meals together, arguing over papers together, and maybe
Yeah.
get a taste to take our classes in our hall or come to our convivium, which is more like a 4-day, all out nerd philosophy, theology, worship fest or whatever. But kind of an entryway part. And, one of our goals too is if we can get a lot of our supporters to come out at once, it's really easy to update people on what's going on with Davenant. Whereas if you have a 20-person convivium every year and only like 10% of Davenant people can come out for each one, then you sort of miss the opportunity to kind of give people the updates on, hey, these are the books we're doing. Here's what the ministry is like. And we kind of felt like we needed a home base for that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Well, I think it's a smart idea. Charlotte, Raleigh, anywhere in that general area makes sense because there are a lot of Christians there. It's sort of a natural home base, but it's also easy to get to if you're not already there. A lot of places can drive there. Even if you can't drive, it's got an airport. So I think it's a good idea. Now, you're talking about the size of the conference and how the conviviums are a little too small, but you know, we don't necessarily want to just try to jump into the mega conference model either. There are so many of those
Mm,
out there. And I saw a tweet from just a couple days ago. I thought this was an interesting way to sort of capture some of the ethos here. This is from a guy who I don't know him in real life, but I've seen him around on the internet. His name's Caleb Dixon Smith.
hmm
And this is what he said. He said, having spent half the week with all sorts of Davenant Institute friends and associates, I'm reminded how cool they generally are and how radically superior in real life conversation can be for so many things. It's a lot of fun just having splendid people to talk to. And to me, that kind of captured the magic of a lot of events that I have attended over the years with Davenant. The big featured talks; those are good, those are fun. They're kind of the reason for the gathering. But then just the breakaways, the conversations, that actually becomes central to most people's
That's right.
experiences.
And that's one of my goals with these conferences is, yeah, in a sense, probably if you get over 200 or something, you just lose the camaraderie part of it.
Hmm.
So I think we want it small enough where you can know most people's names. Small enough where you can walk up to a main speaker and it doesn't feel weird. There's no. I remember once I was at a T4G. It's not like everyone will figure it out, and all the speakers at the front, and there was like a what is it called? Like a little there's like almost a fence around them. Can't remember at theaters they have like those
Yeah.
queue lines that are I can't remember what those are called though. It's like we just can't go talk to them. And part of that with that many people, totally understandable. And yet you miss something, because if Kevin talks, I just want to walk up and like, hey, I really liked your talk. You kind of said something strange I didn't fully understand. Can I ask you about the conscience? That's what you want. And I want to share meals together, so you need to have it small enough where you can just have meals and have tables together, breakfast together, all this kind of stuff. We went out. I invited the whole event out to a restaurant that had beverages that are not always acceptable to Baptists, but are acceptable to most other communions. It was invited everyone, and like not everyone came. Maybe like 30 people came out of the group, but it was kind of fun. And you'd have all, like, from speakers to professors to someone who just heard about this on the internet, doesn't know who we are, and there's like an interesting mix of people. I think that's really beneficial. And Caleb's point's important, because there's a lot of ministry that happens when you have like a 25-year-old who's maybe kind of fresh into ministry or something, who can just walk up to Carl Trueman and ask a few questions. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, there's something cool about that.
Yeah.
So we want to be able to make space for real conversations, deep ones. And to Kayla's point, we were actually out there since Wednesday together, doing all sorts of things, even before the conference proper. And it was a lot of fun. And the conference, there's one of the things I did notice on our first break, we had lots of food and stuff. There was vibrant conversations. And to me, that's key. When Paul does his missionary work, he does it with dozens of coworkers or friends. And I just think we want to be that kind of group that can facilitate and be a seedbed for those not only do ministry together, but also do whatever work they're in together. It could be lawyers or whatever, plumbers, who knows?
Yeah, well, that's
Um,
interesting too. What was your read on the average attendee? Is it all pastors? Is it all, academics who are in grad school? Like who comes to these events?
it seemed like half were either professor, pastor type people, and the other half were just like um, someone who took a class of ours, or some, like, one guy came, was I think a door-to-door salesman. You know what I
Mm.
mean? But loves C.S. Lewis. And so my goal would be for these events. Yes, it's always for the church, but the church is not narrowly the priest or pastor or rector. The church is the people. I think one of the beautiful things with the Davenant Institute is you're enabling like lay ministry and fellowship from people that maybe are, professors or salesmen, but have a deep curiosity. When I talk to people there, it's interesting, and myself included. Many of us have the same background, which is like, hey, we grew up, we really love the Bible, but we were a little bit of nihilists. Like, we love the Word, but not the world God created. And part of it was we discovered natural law and said, oh, everything God created is good and can be made holy with prayer and thanksgiving, which is a Bible verse, by the way. So I'm allowed to say that. And then you go, maybe I can think through like how there's created perfections in the world and learn from others. And you kind of move, and then you make this transition. So I know, like, I talked to Jake Meter about this. It's kind of a similar story as well, where you're like, well, the world opens up when you realize that God not only inspired his word, but made a world that we can look to the ant and so on. So you kind of mentioned earlier, natural law is a big part of that. It
Yeah.
moves you, I think, from a nihilistic point of view of kind of life hating to, yeah, there's sin and corruption to be redeemed for sure. But what God has made is still genuinely good and worthy of our attention.
Mm.
And so I think there's a lot of lay people who get that discovery. They're maybe not going to be a missionary or a pastor, which in evangelical circles, a missionary is just a monk, right? It's a higher level of life. You're never going to be a monk or a pastor, but you genuinely want to know about God's word and world. And I think the Davenant Institute is a place
Yeah.
for that group of people, which includes pastors, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good. I remember when we were first founding, that was always an ideal to bring together church with the academy, but also with a broader range of vocations with lay people that were engaged in ordinary life.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, even to comment on that, we had 8 papers that were like quote unquote breakout sessions, but they were submitted papers by people. And one person that's a medical issue couldn't come, but one of them was a Hillsdale professor, and one of them I said was a salesman, and it didn't matter because they're both intellectually curious, love the Lord, and want to share their knowledge and open up for discussions. And that mixture is real nice because it is possible to be too tweety
Yeah.
and not kind of understand where people are at.
Right.
It's also possible to be too mantly, and so the mantle of preaching, uh, and not always know exactly where people are at. And this is kind of a matrix of all those lay person, academic person, and then a person like yourself who's a pastor or rector.
Yeah. Okay. Very
That'd be
good.
my vision for the conferences. And then if you like that, I mean, you might go to a convivium, which is smaller and more intense, but sometimes you just can't. Like you work a full-time job with a few kids. You're like, I got a Friday night, Saturday morning. Cool. But if you can handle a week away in some cabins in the woods, you can also come to a convivium.
Well, very good. So it sounds like you, in your opinion, it was a success. Had a good time. You want to do it again?
Yeah, I do. I think it was a success. I mean, there was the one negative, we kind of planned a lot of it in a compressed time of maybe, I can't remember, let's say 3 to 5 months. And I've been planning events for like a decade or so. You really need about a year. So
Right.
I'm excited that we have the big picture stuff figured out for next year. I'm going to communicate to all the main speakers and get us to do like a Zoom call to like think through together what we want to communicate and accomplish. Could there be a book that comes out of our next year's conference on the future of Protestantism, but sort of a less of an endy way, but maybe more of it's quite good actually and robust. Not that our last one did that, but there was an implication there given the Peter Leithart's
Yeah.
association.
Yeah.
So I think there could be some neat things that we could do, and then I think we'll give people sufficient time also to carve out time in their schedule about 9 months beforehand.
Hmm.
Hopefully by next month we can start doing save the dates on social media and all that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
We want to do some debriefs before we confirm the exact location, but it'll be either Charlotte or like Raleigh in that corridor right there.
Okay. Very good. Well, that's exciting. Yeah, I'll have to get to work to have something to say.
You'll be there, I think.
Yeah, I haven't been able to come to a lot of Davenant events for the last few years, which is a bummer. Just challenges of life. Also, the end of the school year, beginning of the summer, it fills up so quick. So many
I'm
activities.
sure.
So yeah, it's definitely you got to get the plan out well in advance.
And there it was, as Caleb said, sometime, or I told this to Dale, actually, Dale Stenberg, who was there. He said sometimes when you're so busy, and he is too. He's founded a school. He's helping to found a college. Like you just have to like go and not check your email for a couple of days and see people and be refreshed by encouragement. And this is kind of unique to me. One of the things that I missed the most after my um, on-campus PhD studies was the ability just to like walk into a room with 10 people that I was really good friends with and just talk about stuff that like curiosity about life. And you kind of get a little bit lonely for those discussions if you're not a part of them. Davenant, you don't have to be a PhD, that's not my point, but Davenant's a place for like, it's a matrix for deep discussions about life. And you don't have to be a PhD person, you don't have to have any degrees,
Yeah.
but I think the main qualification is that you have interest and curiosity in the richness of the classical Protestant tradition. And then otherwise, you wrote this. Actually, I love your chapter, by the way, on our book on Protestant social teaching on abortion. Because one of the things you did so well in there is you showed to be Protestant is not to ignore like church history. Like it doesn't, to be Protestant is to include yourself within that trajectory of Bernard of Clairvaux, Augustine of Hippo, and so on. Which to me it's important because Christ said he would build his church. And he didn't say, I will build a trail of blood and the gates of Hades will not overcome that trail.
Yeah. Well, yeah, church history will be an important theme in any discussion about Protestant identity versus alternatives. So, yeah, that's very good. Um,
I'm curious to see what Gavin, because that'll be one thing that he might be able to speak on with, I assume, some controversy at our conference, because he does a lot of talking on the Protestant identity.
yes.
And I think I first of all really enjoy it, but I also think there are some important questions to ask that might be a fun discussion at our conference. So if you want to play Stump the Chump with these guys, it's maybe a good time to put it on your calendar for 2026.
Very good. All right, Wyatt. Well, it's great to hear the update. Christian freedom, or was it? Did you call it Christian freedom, Christian liberty?
Which is what is Christian
What is
freedom? We
Christian
use,
freedom?
I just if the conference. So we use the simpler, more common sense words, and one of the goals is again, this is if you're unfamiliar, or if you are, but you only have, let's say, 12 hours to do something with us. This is the place to go
Gotcha.
to, and the convivium is sort of like if you're a diehard for for that stuff. So we're probably going to keep it to the big picture, but I think what I'd love to do is model deep reflective conversations on things that actually matter to all of us. We'll have public talks. We'll still submit papers, so it's going to be hearing from even attendees, like what do they think,
Gotcha.
and then carry those, the great conversation, you might call it, to be a little bit cheesy, into meal times together, into the evening together, and allow, like, you can come but actually be a part of the conference, not as a sitter, but as a real full participant in the conversation. So if we're going to do this kind of why be Protestant, this sort of robust conversation about why it's good for the world today, I want those who come to be like excited to talk about it. Like talk to the speakers about it on breaks, ask questions about it, come out to the place where you can all come and have alcoholic beverages with us afterwards, and or water if you're a Baptist, and talk. I know they drink now, and talk all
Wyatt,
about. I want that kind of vibe.
you are a Baptist.
I know, I know. It's very. I'm not even a Baptist. I'm pastoring a Baptist
Yeah,
church.
you keep saying they. You should say
That's true.
we.
We, the greatest of all communions, and we'll even find out if Baptist or Protestant or Reformed. Even, why not?
That'll be a good conversation. Yes, and we could think of some challenges to that. So yeah.
We could definitely. I'm thinking of somebody in California that we can invite out to talk about that, which would be kind of hilarious. So all that to say, I think it'll be grand, it'll be fun. But one of the things that I did love about this, I've been to a bunch of, you have too, conferences, and the big ones are often cool. But I just felt like I learned the most in panels or in conversation.
Yeah. No, certainly. I don't want to name the names because I'm not trying to be personal against some of these, but I've been to a couple of really, really big church and theology conferences, the kind that are in convention centers that span multiple, like 3, 4, 5 days. And I usually leave them disappointed, not because any one person, did a bad job, but just like, I didn't really get to hang out and talk with people. And um, the whole business of running something that big just kind of takes over. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely prefer a setting where you can hear the one talk, and you can stop and you can talk with other people afterwards and kind of build on it. And yeah, and there's a chance of kind of interacting with almost everybody who's at the conference. To me, that's awesome. Whereas when you get into thousands of people, like it's not even possible. So you just interact with a dozen.
Yeah, and that's what like when we did even the panel discussion. When people ask questions, they could just say, "Oh, just respond to them by their first name because we met this week." You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That was cool. So I think that's kind of one of the. I think that might be, like, we might say, a selling point on this.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think we're gonna. Well, one, I don't think we could compete with TGC or these big conferences for size, but we don't. There's no reason to do that because we're a different type of thing. And so to keep what makes Davenant, I think, requires, maybe having a number cap or something like that to allow conversations to happen. Um, Thank you for the interview
Absolutely.
and inviting me onto your podcast.
Yeah, no, it's great to get to hear the update. Sorry I missed it again, but yeah, great job. Thank you for organizing that, and yeah, we'll look forward to the future of Protestantism, the future of the Davenant Institute.
Part two. I feel like it needs a part two. I don't know why. Just seems like we're ready for it. So
Yeah,
thank you,
you
Stephen.
got it.